Sorry, boy, but his captain's got to teach his men what happens to those what crossing.
Captain's got to teach stuff.
Morning from the Batcave. It is Saturday, May 2nd, and this episode is going to be about Daniel 10 through 12. Believe it or not, Daniel 10 through 12 is one single event. It's one single prophecy. It's basically the prophecy that Daniel is given by the angel Gabriel. Gabriel drops Michael's name 3 times in the prophecy. He literally is telling Michael, he's telling him Michael's the restrainer. Michael restrains with him, and he helps Michael. Okay, and he basically says that the two of them are really the only angelic princes in the earth that are working for God on behalf of Israel. He's saying the others are basically with Satan. Okay, so if you understand the 70 nations and the Table of Nations, the 70 nations were essentially given over to angelic princes that all aligned with Satan. And when that happened, basically God took out Abraham out of the nations, and he sets over them Michael as their prince, to basically be the angelic prince that watches over and protects Israel. And he does that unless Israel is breaking their covenant, and then God is chastening them. And so Michael will get out of the way for that chastening, but for the most part, Michael is guarding and defending them. So when we talk about Daniel, you need to understand Daniel is not a super mysterious book, but you need to understand how it's broken up. Daniel is essentially 4 stories and followed by 4 visions. And if you know Daniel and the number 4, you have the 4 beasts, the 4 parts of the you have the 4 parts of Nebuchadnezzar's statue, the 4 beasts. The number 4 is big with Daniel because 4 represents the 4 corners of the earth, or the 4 winds, the 4 points of the cross, the 4 gospels. If you understand the number 4 and the significance with God, it basically means it's going forth in every direction. That's why God uses the cross. That's why the gospel is fourfold. You'll see the number 4 used when you're feeding the 5 loaves and 4 fishes. You have a crowd of 5,000 and a crowd of 4,000, because the 5 represents the Pentateuch and the 4 represents the 4 Gospels. So you're going to see this in Zechariah. You're going to hear about 4 chariots and 4 horsemen. You're going to hear about 4 smiths and 4 horns. Again, that 4 is generally represented in terms of Israel being scattered to the 4 winds and then gathered from the 4 winds. And you're going to see this go all the way to the end of Revelation when you have the 4 corners of the earth, where basically the last battle of Gog Magog at the end of the millennium, when all the enemies of God gather from the 4 corners of the earth to come against him. Again, that's the gospel goes out to the 4 corners of the earth. The enemies of God descend upon Jerusalem in the last days to the 4 corners of the earth. That's why the number 4 is significant. It's always representing the entire breadth of the creation and where these things are going. And so if you understand why that makes sense in Daniel is part of the dispersion, and his prophecies are about the times of the Gentiles. So you're going to read a prophecy in Zechariah when Israel is starting to be regathered back to the land and the temple's being rebuilt, and it talks about the 4 horns and the 4 smiths. Those are talking about the powers that scattered Israel and then the powers that are driving Israel back into the promised land. Okay, in Daniel, all his prophecies and all his experiences are about the times of the Gentiles. They're either a specific prophecy about the times of the Gentiles, or they're a narrative experience that is going to reflect that period of the times of the Gentiles. And the times of the Gentiles is essentially the time it was prophesied all the way back in Deuteronomy, when God told Israel that they're a stubborn nation, and even though he's done all this stuff for them, he knows that they're going to rebel against him, and he's going to scatter them to basically into the Gentiles. And there he's going to chasten them, and they're going to be persecuted with a sword and famine and all this other stuff, until the time of the Gentiles is complete. And so the time of the Gentiles does not end until Christ is reigning in the millennial kingdom. Israel is never truly sovereign, a truly sovereign, independent, and superior nation again until Christ rules in the millennium. You got to understand that when God drew Abraham out of the 70 nations, he made Abraham so powerful that all the surrounding kings were scared of him. Abraham took his 300 trained soldiers and he went and beat basically Nimrod's armies. And you find Nimrod basically retreating back into Sumeria and essentially building the Tower of Babel so that they're not scattered throughout the four corners of the earth, because Abraham essentially beat their armies. Okay, that's what happened. And then they go into Egypt, which is the next most powerful kingdom, and they become so powerful in Egypt that the Egyptians are scared that they're going to take over. And so the Egyptians start persecuting them, and then God crushes Egypt, and then they come out of Egypt. And you need to understand, they come out of Egypt with like 12 million people, something ballpark in that. It's between 6 and 12 million people. But it's in a time when the whole world's population is probably somewhere between 3 and 10 million. Or I'm sorry, that's too small. It's probably around 30 million. So if you do the math and you look at the progression of humanity from Noah to that time and how long people lived and how long the different nations are getting, Israel's population, they're a big nation at this time. They're a big and powerful nation. And if the higher numbers are true, they comprise something like 6 to 10% of the world's population. They're a big people. And people don't understand how big they were. And Israel essentially has that same level of population today that they had way back when they were taken out of Egypt and way back when they were in their prime, because they've gone through so much hardship and because they've been so much persecuted and killed and things like that throughout the earth. Their population really hasn't grown since their heyday. But in their heyday, you got to remember, Jews are a small people now in a much bigger world because all the other populations have been growing. But back in Solomon's day, they had the richest king in the world. They had the best territory in the world. They had the strongest armies in the world. They had the strongest alliances in the world. They had the strongest economy in the world. And they were a numerous people. Back then, they were huge. And God basically told them that you're going to fall because of, the things that you do, and basically the worship of idols. And they fall to the Gentiles, and Daniel represents that. Daniel represents Israel's captivity to the Gentiles. So he is going to basically be one of the princes of Israel when Nebuchadnezzar comes the first time and he takes away a bunch of princes of Israel. This is before he actually destroys the city. He just takes a bunch of their princes away, and he essentially makes them eunuchs and makes them his servants in the castle. So that's Daniel. He's a eunuch. And his friends Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are also eunuchs. And so what you're going to have in the first half of Daniel are you're going to have these four stories. And these four stories are essentially, the first story is how Daniel comes to prominence, because essentially, basically Nebuchadnezzar takes all these people from Jerusalem, and then they basically are there, and they talk his chief steward into letting them just eat vegetables because they can't eat the dirty foods of the Babylonians. And then Nebuchadnezzar has a vision, and he has this vision about the statue with the 4 types of metals on it, and basically he tells all his soothsayers and wise men, and among these would have been the Magi. They were basically a race of philosopher peoples. He basically says, these people they better tell me what my dream is and tell me what the meaning was, otherwise I'm going to kill them all. And Daniel arises out of this and explains to him by God's anointing what the meaning of the dream was, and then what the meaning of the dream was. And so that's how Daniel rises to prominence. After that, Nebuchadnezzar sets up a golden statue and asks for people to worship. So this is the second story. This is about Daniel's friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And this is really all kind of tied together. It's one story, because in the first one, in the first story, Daniel 1 through 2, you have that, and basically he has his Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Those are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Okay, so the first story is really about God establishing Daniel and then preserving Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Okay, so that's Daniel 1, 2, 3. The second story is basically Nebuchadnezzar, and it's Nebuchadnezzar's chastening and humbling. Okay. And, Nebuchadnezzar's chastening and humbling is essentially, Nebuchadnezzar's chastening and humbling is a second vision that Nebuchadnezzar has. And this story is basically told in the first person by Nebuchadnezzar. So you need to understand, These narratives are not really about Daniel. They're about Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel is the one who's interpreting what's happening with Nebuchadnezzar, but Nebuchadnezzar is a macro type of the chief of the nations, and he's the king of Babylon. If you understand, the king of Babylon is a type of the Antichrist, and he's a type of that predominant nation. And Nebuchadnezzar is rolling out, and God is allowing him to do these really bad things because he's a type of the Antichrist, and he's foreshadowing what the Antichrist is going to do. So that's why he has the fiery furnace. That's why he has a golden statue. That's why he's the greatest of the kingdoms. And then this is where he gets humbled, and he actually turns into a beast. This is important. God humbles him and gives him a mind of a beast. Because, again, he's a type of the Antichrist. But he does humble him, and Nebuchadnezzar does repent. So God uses him in this way, but he doesn't destroy him in his humbling purpose in him. So Nebuchadnezzar gives him a mind of the beast. After 7 years, Nebuchadnezzar repents, and listen, this is now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all whose works are truth, and in his ways judgment, and those that walk in pride he is able to abase. So he acknowledges that God is God, and I am just, I'm humbled before him. He has his Job moment here. So Nebuchadnezzar repents. So that's story number 2. Story number 3 is about Nebuchadnezzar. I believe this is his grandson, and his grandson basically loses the kingdom, and he goes too far. And if you understand the story number 1, has Nebuchadnezzar going and taking all the ornaments of the temple, and Daniel 5 has Belshazzar using the ornaments of the temple for a drinking party, and that pisses off God. And so what God does is basically he tells him, this night you are going to be sacked, and that's where Darius the Mede comes in, and it says he's 62 years old, so he is 62 years old, and he takes over this kingdom. Now, you need to understand the Medo-Persian Empire, and you need to understand the whole history of this before you get the context, because the historical context is important if you guys understand where this is going. Okay, the Assyrians are a type of the Gog-Magog invasion. The Babylonians are a type of the Antichrist Empire. Okay, if you read the prophecies, you understand that the Assyrians are a type of the Gog-Magog invasion. The Babylonians are the type of the Antichrist Empire. So when they fall, it's like the Antichrist being fallen. And if you understand how the Antichrist, how Mystery Babylon falls in the last day, the Euphrates River is dried up to make way for the kings of the east, which prophecies in Jeremiah says are led by the Medes, and the Medes come in and sack Mystery Babylon, which I believe is Elam, and then they go up to fight in the Battle of Armageddon, and they end up fighting the Lord. Okay, well, in ancient times, that's how the Medes defeated the Babylonians. They diverted the waters from the Euphrates River in order to lower them so they can make it through essentially the floodgates of Babylon, and they get into the city without a siege. They sneak in the city at night while these guys are partying, and they sack the city without a battle. So it's important because all of this, again, this is all happening in pretty much one generation. You have basically the Medes and the Babylonians ally against the Assyrians to sack Assyria. And remember, Assyria is Gog-Magog, okay? So it's like having the, if you can imagine having the Kurds and the Iraqis or the Turks ally against Russia, right? And they stop Russia, they close them off from the Middle East, and then they turn on each other. Okay, that's what's going to happen in the last days. So what happens is once they're done defeating the Babylonians, they go their separate ways, and Babylon essentially takes over most of the former Assyrian Empire, while the Medes ally with the Persians, and they start growing an empire to the east. And so what you have now is you have Babylon taking the place of the Western power on the west side of the Euphrates. East of the Euphrates, you have the Medes and the Persians growing, just like you have the kings of the east and the Antichrist Empire, okay? And so when you get to this point where now the Medes and Babylonians start fighting with each other, Nebuchadnezzar has been humbled. Nebuchadnezzar was married into the Medes. He basically, that's how they made peace. His father sacked Assyria with the Medes, and then he married his daughter to the king of to Nebuchadnezzar. And so you're literally dealing with their descendants here, just like this is like 2 generations later. All of this is taken place over the course of about 50 years. And basically the Medes come in and they sack it, and then Darius the Mede takes over the kingdom. Okay, so Darius the Mede, you can read about this guy in Herodotus, you can read about Cyrus. He's actually like a co-regent, so he's not really fully ruling the Median kingdom. If you read Daniel's prophecies about the ram and the goat, and the ram has one horn that's bigger than the other, or they have another prophecy about 4 beasts, and the bear is lifted up on one side, and that's because the Medes and the Persians are an unbalanced empire, and eventually it basically becomes the Persian Empire, and the Medes kind of just fade out. So the Medes start out by putting the alliances together. They work with the Babylonians to sack Assyria, which is their main competitor, and then they work with the Persians to sack Babylon, which is the second main competitor, and then the Persians just kind of take over for the Medes. So if you think of the Medes as the Kurds and the Persians as the Iranians, that's probably going to happen in the last days too. So what you end up having is you have a co-regency between Darius the Median and then Cyrus, king of Persia. And that's why you'll see these guys together. So the third story, as I said, you have the first story is Nebuchadnezzar taking Daniel and his friends, and then them rising to prominence, and then God preserving them through the fiery furnace. The second story is God humbling Nebuchadnezzar. The third story is God taking the kingdom from Nebuchadnezzar's descendants. And then the fourth story is Daniel in the lion's den. And Darius is basically he's over the kingdom, and that means he basically took over the Babylonian kingdom while the Persians are ruling in the east. Okay, so it's a co-regency. You have two different kings ruling, kind of just like you have a co-regency in the Roman Empire later on. And Darius is basically ruling over what the Babylonian Empire once was. And he sets Daniel basically over all the other princes, and they don't like that, and so they conspire to have him thrown in the lion's den. They convince Darius to have people pray to him alone. And then what happens is Daniel doesn't pray to him, and so they get him thrown in the lion's den. God preserves him through the lion's den. Those people get thrown in. And so he says this. He says, so Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. They're both ruling at the same time. However, Darius is going to die, and Darius is actually the last king of the Medes, and then Cyrus the Persian is going to rule in the whole thing. So these first 6 chapters of Daniel is really the history of the Babylonians taking over Israel, and then the Babylonians losing the kingdom to the Medes, and then the Medes losing the kingdom to the Persians. All this happens in Daniel's lifetime. He starts out as a boy, and he's an elderly man, like probably close to retirement age by the end of this. So that's the history of Daniel, and then 7 through 12 is going to be the 4 visions of Daniel, okay? And there are precisely 4 visions. People are going to try to tell you it's more than that because of the chapter divisions, but the chapter divisions are jacked up, so don't look at the chapter divisions. Okay, the first vision is you just look right up at the top here. The first vision is in the first year of Belshazzar. The second one is in the 3rd year of Belshazzar. So again, Belshazzar doesn't rule for a long time. Okay, so this is towards the end. So the first vision, if you understand when he's having these visions, the first vision is going to be Belshazzar, and that's when he has the 4 beast visions. And again, he's still in Nebuchadnezzar's reign. And if you remember, Nebuchadnezzar already had the dream of the 4 statues, and Daniel basically tells him the 4 metals and the statues represent the 4 successive kingdoms of Babylon, Persia, Greece, and then Rome, bleeding into a last days kingdom, which is a revived Roman Empire. Belshazzar, in the second day of Belshazzar, Daniel has his 4 beast vision. And he's basically, it mirrors Nebuchadnezzar's vision, but it really is talking about how these 4 beasts are going to finally be, their kingdom is going to be taken over, and basically the Messiah and his saints are going to rule in their place. So this stuff is very much mirrored in the book of Revelation if you understand the language used. Again, if you're going to study prophecy, get a King James Version, because they are jacking up these new texts, and they're changing things left and right with their denominational bents, and they're putting their interpretations into the text. So be careful with that. They're now getting ready to start doing a critical collated text of the Old Testament, which means, for the most part, your interpretations of the Old Testament have been consistent because they believe the Hebrew they've all had the Masoretic text Hebrew. Now they're going to start to do the same thing they're doing with the critical text of the New Testament Greek to the Old Testament, and they're going to start changing the Old Testament left and right too. You guys need to be aware of this. This is the past 150 years has been a vast apostasy, and there's been a ton of bad ideas coming out and bad science, and also changing the Bible. And you guys need to realize we are in the time of the great apostasy, and they've been working at this for 100. This is a satanic plot. They're changing the Bible, they're changing the prophecies, they're changing the meaning of words. They're turning people over to pseudoscience, and all this stuff has been going on for the past 150 years, hardcore. Okay, so anyways, get yourself a King James version if you're going to study this stuff. But going to Daniel 7, you have Belshazzar, the king of Babylon, and that's his second vision, and that's going to be about the this is going to be about the four beasts. And then if you go to chapter 8, that's going to be about the ram and the he-goat. And this is important because Belshazzar is just about to lose his kingdom to the Persians. It hasn't happened yet. Okay, so he's telling them that here's where he is. He's in Shushan, and he's in the province of Elam. And if you know who Elam is, Elam was the original forefather of the Persians. It is just basically downriver from, and on the other side of the river from Babylon. So they would have been controlling it at this time. But the Elamites and the Medes were basically on the east side of the Babylonian River, and the Medes became what are now the Kurds, and the Elamites became what are now the Iranians. Okay, so in this one, he has basically this story of the Persians and the Greeks, and he talks about the ram and the goat. And the ram is Alexander. It breaks into four horns that are his four generals. And then the ram is the Medo-Persian Empire, and then the goat is Alexander's empire with the four horns. Okay, so that's the second vision. The third vision is going to be chapter 9, and that is where Daniel is studying Jeremiah's prophecy of 70 weeks. And his 70 weeks are about the captivity of Israel to the Gentiles. 70 is the number of the nations in the table of nations. And so Israel's supposed to be captive to the king of Babylon for 70 years. Well, they are captive to the king of Babylon for 70 years. And at the end of that 70 years, they are released by Cyrus, king of Persia, to go back to Israel and rebuild their temple. And then in Darius, I think it's Darius II, then they're allowed to rebuild the wall. And so they are released from their captivity to Babylon, but they're still under the sovereign control of Persia, so they're not totally free. And so Daniel's sitting here, it says in the first year of Darius, the son of Azarias of the seed of the Medes. So this is Darius who sacked Babylon. He's just beginning to rule, and Daniel is sitting here going, okay, the 70 years are up, and Babylon's been sacked, so why aren't we going back and rebuilding Jerusalem? That's why Daniel is studying Jeremiah, to understand the prophecy. And Gabriel comes back and tells him that these 70 weeks are actually 70 weeks of years. And what this represents is it's a prophetic representation of the totality of the times of the Gentiles, which begins with the sacking of Jerusalem and ends when Messiah comes and sets up his millennial kingdom. Okay? So Daniel's already had these visions about the millennial kingdom in the statue, or Nebuchadnezzar had one that Daniel interpreted, and now Daniel's had one in the four beasts. And now Daniel's had this vision about the little horn and this final Antichrist, and he's telling him that the 70 weeks of years are also this prophetic 70 weeks that takes you to the end of the times of the Gentiles. And if you know your prophecy, that 70 weeks has a 2,000-year gap between the 69th and 70th week where the Gentiles are evangelized. But he brings them to the end of that, and he says, therefore, from going forth with the command to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince. So that happened under the Persians. Until Messiah Prince shall be 70 weeks and 62 weeks. And that's like 380 years or something like that. But essentially, he gives them the time from the time in... this is why Ezra and Nehemiah seem so mundane, but they're so important. Ezra is about the rebuilding of the temple, and Nehemiah is about the building of the wall. And so when you see that, and going forth with the commandment to build Jerusalem, that's the wall, and it's going to be the wall and the moat. That starts the ticker until Messiah comes. And that literally is the time between the rebuilding of Jerusalem under Nebuchadnezzar to the time where Jesus shows up in his triumphal entry. And he says that's going to be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The 7 weeks were the 49 years they used to rebuild the temple. And then the 62 weeks is the time that it takes from that time until Messiah comes. And then it says after the 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off. So he tells them that Jesus is going to have his triumphal entry and be cut off that same year. Okay? So he does. He has his triumphal entry, and he's crucified within days of that. And then it says, but not for himself, because he's going to die for our sins. And then the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. So he's telling him the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. So he's telling him the ethnic people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and the end of the war desolations are determined. So this is where you get to the point where he's now bleeding this into the end times, because the people of the prince that shall come are the actual armies who sacked Jerusalem in 70 AD. Again, the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city. That's who destroys the city. Titus doesn't destroy the city. He doesn't order the city destroyed. He doesn't order the temple burned. The people, the armies, do that on their own against his orders. Okay, and then it says the end thereof shall be with a flood. Well, if you know, when Jerusalem is destroyed again in Daniel's 70th week, the dragon spews out a flood of water out of his mouth to try to destroy the Jews, because basically they're going to flee, and he's going to try to pour a flood of water after them. And it says, but the earth opens up and helps them. Okay. I believe that is Christ touching down and splitting the Mount of Olives, but I'm not sure. It could be just another earthquake. Anyways, and it says, unto the end of the war, desolations are determined, and that's the abomination of desolation. And he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. So in other words, he is going to reestablish Old Covenant Judaism for 7 years. And in the midst of the week, he shall cause a sacrifice and oblation to cease. For the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate. That's the abomination of desolation. That's him standing in the temple and claiming to be God, and claiming all worship unto himself, and he stops the temple sacrifices. Even until the consummation that is determined shall be poured out on the desolate. Okay? So the consummation he talks about in his earlier prophecy, I believe it's Daniel 8, where he talks about how his kingdom will be consumed and given to the saints of the Most High. So he's talking about Christ pouring out his wrath in the second half of Daniel's 70th week. And it says that shall be determined to pour it up upon the desolate. So the desolate are those who worship the beast in his image. Okay? So he's telling them in this this is the second to the last of his visions, how this is going to end, how the times of the Gentiles is going to end. Now you're going to get to his last vision. And this is important because his last vision is chapter 10, 11, and 12. Most people don't think of that because it says, look, in the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, okay, we're starting a new vision. And when you get to chapter 11, you see, also in the 1st year of Darius the Mede, even I stood up to confirm and strike them. And I'll admit, when you're flipping through the headings, it looks like, okay, this is the beginning of a new prophecy. But you need to understand this is an extension of chapter 10, because in chapter 10, the angel Gabriel shows up. Daniel has this vision, and the angel Gabriel shows up to explain to him the meaning of the vision. And it ends with him saying, and then he said to thee, knowest from wherefore I come unto thee, I will now return to fight with the prince of Persia, and when I am gone forth, lo, the prince of Greece will come. Okay? Now he's telling Daniel what he's doing behind the scenes, and he's literally telling him that I tried to bring this message to you immediately when you started praying and fasting, but I was withstood by the king of Persia, and Michael your prince came with me, and he restrained the king of Persia so that I could get to you. Okay, he literally came and started fighting a spiritual war against the king of Persia so that Gabriel could get to him, because Michael is the restrainer. And he says this, and he says, I will show thee that which is noted in the scripture of truth, and there is none that holdeth with me in these things but Michael your prince. Okay. So he's telling him literally in the prophecy about the abomination of desolation, about the 70 weeks, about when the Antichrist comes, that the only one who holds with him, and this is important, the only one that holds with him is Michael. And that word holds is this word shazak. And if you look at remember all the different translations, you're going to have holds, restrains, or stands, okay? The one who restrains is taken out of the way. What is one of the meanings of Shazak? Restrain. He binds. He conquers. He strengthens. He repairs. He fastens upon. He seizes. Okay? Michael restrains the enemies of Israel from taking over Israel and destroying God's people. Okay? So that's what he's telling you Michael does. Okay? Then he goes immediately into chapter 11. Remember, he came to tell Daniel the meaning of the vision, but he never does it in chapter 10. Okay? He's still talking in chapter 11. So when he says this, he literally says, I'm going to tell you these things that are going to come, okay? So he says, now I am come to make thee understand what shall befall thy people in the latter days, for the vision is for many days. He's literally telling them what's going to happen to Israel in the last days, but then he doesn't say anything. He just talks about, but nobody holds with me except Michael, your prince. So that's why you understand the chapter break in 11 shouldn't be there. Chapter 11 says, and also I, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and strengthen him. This is Gabriel still talking. Gabriel basically says, Michael stands with me, and I stand with him. He said, Michael stood with me against the king of Persia, and I stood with Michael in the first year of Darius the Mede to strengthen him. Well, if you know what happened in the first year of Darius the Mede, Darius sacks Babylon and essentially sets the Jews free when the temple implements are being violated. So that's important. The temple implements are being violated, and Gabriel is standing with Michael to do something about it. And what he does is he basically sends Darius the Mede to go essentially sack Babylon at that moment. That's what Michael's doing, and Gabriel is helping him. So think about what's going on in Daniel at this time. Daniel is getting this mysterious message, and so is Belshazzar on the wall that is written by a hand, and literally is telling him your kingdom's going to get taken away, while Darius the Mede is getting ready to come and sack the kingdom. Behind the scenes is Gabriel writing that message, and Michael basically pushing the armies of Darius the Mede to sack Babylon in response to them violating the implements of the temple. That's so important. You need to understand Gabriel and Michael. Gabriel's the messenger, and Michael is the military leader. That's who they are, okay? So he's telling him the one who restrains with me is Michael. That is the one who we fight for God, and everybody else is for Satan in this world. And if you understand how it is, Michael and Gabriel are God's two witnesses in the angelic realm, okay? They're the only two angels named outside of Lucifer in the Bible. Michael and Gabriel are God's two witnesses in the angelic realm. Just like you have Joshua and Caleb against the other 10, you have 2 against 10. Just like you have the 2 witnesses against the 10 kings, you have the 2 angels against the other 70 angels. Okay, the 10 represents in that case, they represent the 10 tribes of Israel, which turn into northern Israel. If you know that, Joshua and Caleb are from Judah and Benjamin. And so you literally have good Israel versus bad Israel. If you know the 2 witnesses and the 10 kings represent the kingdom of the Antichrist. The 2 witnesses represent God's people. Okay, I mean they're literal 2 men, but they represent God's people. And in the angelic realm, you have the 2 angels who represent God against the 70 angels that are really all standing for Satan. Okay, and that's why he says, no one restrains with me, no one holds with me except Michael, your prince. Michael is the military angelic prince over Israel, and Gabriel is God's messenger to Israel. Okay, that's why Gabriel comes and gives Mary the message of Messiah, because he is God's messenger. All your prophecies are coming from him. Okay, so when you get to this, he goes on and he's saying, also in Darius the Mede, I stood to confirm and strengthen him. Who? Michael and Darius the Mede against the Babylonians, okay? And then he says, and now I will show thee the truth. So now he's going to explain Daniel's prophecy. And he goes on and he tells them about all these intrigues that are going to go on back and forth between, remember, he already gave Daniel the vision of the goat who breaks up into the 4 winds, right? Well, he tells them about the mighty king, because he's already explained that these are the Persians and the Greeks. And he tells them this is what's going to happen with the Persians and Greeks. So he keeps giving Daniel this ongoing story about the immediate historical future, but this story always bleeds into what is going to happen in the last days. It always starts out historically and then bleeds into the last days. And he keeps carrying this story forward. Gabriel keeps doing this with Daniel. He does it through Nebuchadnezzar at first, and then he does it directly with Daniel after that, okay? And then, so he's talking about the kings of the north and the kings of the south. And if you understand this, these are Ptolemy and Antiochus of the 2 biggest kingdoms of Alexander's 4 generals. But in the last days, the king of the north and the king of the south are literally going to be probably Arabia. And then after that, it's going to become this sub-Saharan African empire. And the king of the north is going to be Gog-Magog. So he's literally telling them what's going to go on between essentially this north-south rivalry to control the Middle East, okay? And he's going to go back and forth about this, and he's going to tell them how this bleeds into the last days empire. And then he's going to get to a point where he talks about how the Antichrist rises up. And he doesn't really say who he is. He just says another one will come out of his estate. In other words, another one's going to become from his ancestry. Well, if you know what he talks about the little horn earlier on, he tells him he's going to come from in the latter time of the Greek's kingdom. And so in other words, he's coming from the region of one of the Greek kings. Well, that is going to be Turkey, where he comes from. So he's going to come from Turkey, and eventually he's going to basically win over Israel. He's going to set up a buffer state along the Euphrates River. He's going to block out the Medes, just like the Babylonians. Listen, the Turks are not going to be on the side of the Gog-Magog invasion. The reason why people think Turkey is part of Gog-Magog is for two reasons. One, Noah's Ark is in eastern Turkey or in Armenia, okay? And so all of the Japhethites once lived in Turkey, but they all spread out from there, okay? Two, in the days of the Medes Empire, they actually had the Scythians living among them, and the Scythians sacked cities in eastern Turkey, and then they were allied with the Medes, and so they were in there in the days of Darius the Mede. That's important. He was allied with them, and then he eventually turned on them. That's why you have traces of Scythian or Gog-Magog culture in Turkey, but that's never been their permanent home. Okay? Their permanent home is literally in the Stan nations and Mongolia and Siberia and basically the bulk of Russia. That's where the Scythians are, and that's where Gog-Magog are. Gog-Magog is literally, I'm going to tell you who, Kim Jong-un, that's Gog. Magog is Mongolia. If you understand the ancient history, Mongolia and Manchuria are just transliterations of the same thing. And Korea was once called Goguryeo, which means land of Gog. Just like Hungary, the Huns came from Korea. The Huns came from Korea and migrated all the way down to Hungary, and Hungary means the land of the Huns. Well, the land they came from is called Goguryeo, and it literally means the land of Gog, okay? Magog is Mongolia. If you can't understand that Magog and Mongolia are etymologically linked, you're not paying attention, okay? And the Mongolians once ruled all of what is now Russia and all the Stan countries, all of what was the former Soviet Union. And that major principality has transferred power to Russia, which is why you have Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal. The Russians are the descendants of Riphath, okay, and then they later are called Rosh. While you have the Medes are the Kurds, and then you have Gomer is Assyria, and I guess some of them go to Germany, but Gomer is mainly Assyria, and then the House of Togarmah are the Turkmen. Okay, they all just sound alike. They're just transliterated different because of the confusion of languages. So that's who your Northern Alliance is. And Turkey proper, you need to understand, for most of its history, Turkey in the east was called Assyria, and Turkey in the west was called Lydia. That's the middle of Turkey is Lydia, and then the westernmost part of Turkey was called Grecia. That's where Javan was. Okay, so in the time that Daniel's writing, nobody is considering Turkey to be a Japhethite nobody's considering Turkey to be like Gog-Magog. Okay, nobody is considering that. Gog-Magog in the time of Ezekiel, who is contemporary with Daniel, is literally the Scythian hordes that are up there. And Herodotus notes this, and Josephus notes this. They all know they're the Scythian hordes that come from above the Caucasus. Okay? Meanwhile, Western Turkey is called Grecia. And remember, Daniel's prophecies are all about the Greeks who are coming next to take over the Persian Empire. And so the Antichrist, he says, comes out of Grecia, and the main part of Grecia, Greece, Philip of Macedon is in Macedonia, and he takes over Achaia, which is where the other Greek states are. They're all around the Aegean Sea, and he takes over the Spartans. But one is Philip of Macedon is north of Turkey, and the two main places south of him are Turkey and Greece, and he takes over both of them. Okay, so the Greek Empire is literally all around the Aegean Sea. So don't think of it as modern Greece or Achaia. Think of it as Turkey. Turkey is Greece, okay? So he tells them that Turkey is basically, the Antichrist is going to come from Turkey, and he is going to essentially go south and east and toward the Pleasant Land. And essentially they're doing that right now. It's called Operation Euphrates Shield. They're pushing all the Kurds east of the Euphrates, because remember, the Kurds are the Medes, and they're going to lead the final coalition to destroy Mystery Babylon. That's in Jeremiah. And then he says he's going to stretch forth his hand upon the countries, and Egypt will not escape. So that's what the Antichrist does next. If you read Isaiah, I think it's Isaiah, I want to say 13 or 17, he takes over Egypt. I think it's 13. He takes over Egypt, and it says that they're going to be given over to a cruel master. At the time, the Lord is coming on a swift cloud. Well, remember, the Antichrist is down. He just got done sacking Egypt, and then he goes up because he hears about the kings of the east. It says, tidings out of the east and the north shall trouble him. The ships of Kittim, which are going to be the remnants of the NATO naval powers, probably led by England because America's toast at this time, they're coming against him from the Mediterranean Sea, and that's going to be the north. And then out of the east, you're going to have the kings of the east coming at him by land. And he goes up from Egypt to go back to Israel and fight him. And that's when he does the abomination of desolation. And that very day he does it, he's going to kill the two witnesses who've been troubling everybody for 3.5 years. And then he's going to, after they're dead, they're going to have this 3-day celebration. And then he's going to go sit in the temple and claim that he's God. When he does that, on that day, Jesus is going to show up, destroy him with the brightness of his coming. I believe he's going to shoot him through the face and his hand like this. Like he puts up his hand against the brightness of his coming, and he gets shot through the face with a lightning bolt, and he's dead. Okay? That's what's going to happen the day that he commits the abomination of desolation. After that, they're going to take his body and somehow try to wire him up to AI in some machine, some robot, and that's going to be the image of the beast, and they're going to claim to have preserved his soul. It's important because when it talks about the last days of the beast kingdom, it says that the beast is captured and his body is destroyed. Why are they talking about destroying his body? They're literally worshiping the image of the beast, which is a combination of his body and some like robot or statue or something. That's what the image of the beast is. It's going to claim to have preserved his life in the image of the beast. Okay? So it says he plants his tabernacles between the palace and the holy seas. That's where his armies are going to be based. It's going to be southwest of Israel, and the kings of the east are going to be of Jerusalem, and the kings of the east are going to be northeast of Jerusalem. He sets them up on the holy mountain, and it says, and he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. How does he come to his end? Jesus Christ destroys him without hand. He's destroyed by the breath of his mouth. He's destroyed by a sword, but not by a man's hand, because I think Jesus destroys him with a bolt of lightning. So when he says, I saw Satan fall as lightning from heaven, remember, at the same time this is happening, this is at that time shall Michael stand up. And stand up should be arise. He says he's the one that stands for Ahmad, okay? And this stand literally says he abides, he appoints, he arises, he sees, he confirms. Remember, he stands with Gabriel for the people of Israel. But he says, at that time shall he Ahmad, and that also can mean arise. So Ahmad and Ahmad, okay? It's the same word, but it can mean raise up or stand. Okay, in other words, stand firm or raise up. Well, if you know what happens in Revelation 12, at the middle of the tribulation, at the same time that the Antichrist is sitting in the temple and claiming he's God, Michael is up there casting Satan out of heaven. So this is important. At the same time he's saying he's God, Michael is casting Satan out of heaven. Jesus is arriving to destroy Satan with the breath of his coming. Satan, he says prophetically, he saw him fall as lightning from heaven. Michael casts him out of heaven, and the Antichrist is destroyed by the brightness of his coming. And Jesus says he comes, and it's going to be like lightning flashing. So what happens? The Antichrist is destroyed by a bolt of lightning. That's also Satan falling from heaven. That's also the brightness of Jesus' coming. That's also Michael casting him down. That's also Michael arising out of the way of Israel. And now Satan has come down with full fury. And now Satan has full control of Israel. Michael is the restrainer who gets out of the way. All those things are simultaneous. And if you understand, Revelation takes you up to chapter 10. And then he literally tells him, when the seventh trumpet sounds, then the Lord is going to take over the kingdom. The three woes are literally the rise of the Antichrist kingdom, the rise of the kings of the east, and then the coming of the Lord's kingdom. That's the third woe, and that's the seventh trumpet, okay? And when the seventh trumpet sounds, all these things happen in one day. You have the Antichrist claims he's God. He's destroyed by the brightness of the Lord's coming. Christ raptures the church. The Jews flee Jerusalem, and he starts pouring out his wrath immediately. And he does it for 3.5 years. And he touches down at the end of the 7 bowls, splits Jerusalem in two. The last of the Jews flee to Basra. And after that, he is fighting for the Jews. Okay? This is when the 24 elders say, now you have taken your kingdom and begun to reign, and behold, your wrath has come. The 24 elders and kingdoms are saying Christ's wrath comes at that point. Okay? But if you read Matthew 24 and Luke 17 synoptically, he says the day that the Jews are supposed to flee Jerusalem, the day they see it surrounded by armies, remember the kings of the east are surrounding it, and the Antichrist army is surrounding it too. The Antichrist army is in the southwest, and the kings of the east are in the northeast. They're surrounding it, okay? And then the Antichrist does the abomination of desolation. That's when the Jews flee Jerusalem. And in Luke 17, it says that night they will see one taken and one left. The very night that they're fleeing Jerusalem, they will see one taken and one left. Understand that. Everything is going up to that day, because if you understand the importance of that day is the Antichrist's counterfeit to Jesus Christ's death and resurrection. That's literally what's happening. Okay, he's either going to, not either, he's going to die. Remember, he's going to kill the two witnesses, and they're going to mirror Christ's death and resurrection. They lay there dead for 3 days, and then they're resurrected. Okay? Then Christ is going to kill him, and they're going to fake his resurrection with the image of the beast. The Antichrist is a counterfeit to Christ. He counterfeits Christ taking over Israel, or taking over the Middle East and the Promised Land. He counterfeits him bringing the Jews back to prominence in the earth. And then he's going to try to counterfeit the death and resurrection of Messiah. That's what the image of the beast is. It is a counterfeit to the resurrection. And what he does is he tries to offer Israel a counterfeit resurrection, which is called transhumanism. It's man-made, man-controlled eternal life. That's what transhumanism is. You need to understand these things, because you guys are saying some dumb stuff over at FAI Studios and Joel Richardson Ministries. Listen, if you guys want to be students and just talk about prophecy, just do that. But you guys are putting yourselves out there and making a bunch of money and claiming to be subject matter experts when you're not. Stop it. You want to be a student? I'll be happy to study with you guys. But I listen to you guys say stuff that is like, you guys, do you even read? Okay, you clearly are a noob to Bible prophecy, yet you know how to make a nice YouTube video and monetize the crap out of the thing and get hundreds of thousands of subscribers, but you don't know how to read left to right and understand what's plainly said. Stop it. Please, in the name of Jesus, stop it. You're confusing people, and we're getting close to that day, and you're confusing them, and if they follow you, they're going to be staring down the Antichrist and trying to figure out if that's Jesus returned or not. That's how much you're confusing people. If you understand what happens at the end of the 6 seals, the whole earth is flipped upside down. All the satellites are going to fall to the ground. All the communications are going to be shot. And they're going to hear about the Antichrist rising the earth. That's why Jesus says, don't believe if you hear he's in the deserts. Where's the deserts? The Middle East. Don't believe if you hear he's in the inner rooms. Where's the inner rooms? The Holy of Holies. Don't believe that unless you see me coming in the clouds. That's what Jesus is telling them. And you're telling them after the 6 seals, Christ is going to come. No, after the 6 seals, the Antichrist is going to come. You guys are setting them up to believe the Antichrist is Christ when he comes, and they're going to hear it by a rumor, and you're not teaching them to believe what Jesus said. Don't believe it unless you see him coming in the clouds. Every eye will see him. That is the title of my book. That's the point of my book. I am trying desperately to defend the world against you fools that are literally confusing the crap out of people. I'm talking about Pre-Trib. I'm talking about Pre-Wrath. I'm talking about FAI Studios. I'm talking about Joel Richardson. I'm talking about all you guys. I am desperately trying to defend the world against you guys confusing them into following the Antichrist as we approach the last days. Repent. Read the Word of God. Listen to somebody who knows what they're talking about. Okay? I'm not a prophet or the son of a prophet. I'm just a guy who reads the Bible and has been studying this since my childhood. But words go left to right. They're not trying to confuse you guys. Get an interlinear, get a King James version, and you won't be confused. If you guys are sitting here with a net Bible and all these modern translations to try to figure it out, and you don't know that these translations have been changed a dozen times in the past 75 years. These Bibles have been changed a dozen times in the past 75 years. You don't have the right Bible. Get the right Bible to study prophecy. Get a KJV. That's all I got to say. Batman out. Peace.